Okay, so let us consider, let us write the, let us discuss the Python program to compute the average of all the elements given in the list. So using built-in functions, we have to write the program, and without using built-in functions, we have to write the same program. So first consider, so we have to write the program to compute the average of all the elements in the list without using built-in functions. Okay, so now see this one. So first we have to declare a variable. First we have to declare a variable called list1. So here we have declared the variable called list1, which is initialized with all these elements. Okay, and another variable called sum. Initially sum is 0 because we don't know the sum of all these elements, and one more variable average, which is initialized to 0 in order to store the average of all these elements. And count, one more variable we have taken, count is equal to 0, so in order to hold the number of elements in the given list. Okay, so now so we have to perform addition of all these elements. So list traversal we have to do, we have to perform the list traversal. So that is why we have used for loop. So for I, so for loop variable I, so initially initially I is the first element, and for the second iteration of the for loop, the I is the second element. For the first, sorry, for the first iteration of the for loop, I is equal to first element. For the second iteration of the for loop, I is the second element. For the third iteration of the for loop, I is equal to fourth element. So like that. Okay, so for I is equal to for I in list1. So in is a keyword and for is a keyword. I and list1, these are all these two variables are user defined variables. So now we are inside the for loop. So these two instructions, they belongs to the for loop. So that is why these two instructions are started after the one tab space. That means these two instructions are inside the for loop. Okay, that is the syntax of Python programming language. We know that, we have gone through the example programs in case of our first module. Now compute. So for the first iteration, I is equal to 2, first element. Sum is equal to 2 plus, sum is equal to sum plus I. So initially sum is 0, 0 plus 2. Now sum is equal to 2. And we have to increment the count because we have visited the first element. So count is equal to 1. Okay. So now, so for the second iteration of the loop, once again for the second iteration of the loop, I is equal to second element, that is 5. So once again perform the addition, sum is equal to sum plus I, that is sum is previously 2, 2 plus 5, that is 7, 7 is stored in the variable called sum. Once again we have visited the second element, so we are going to increment the count. So this operation will be repeated 5 times. The for loop will be repeated 5 times. For I is equal to 2, I is equal to 5, I is equal to 4, I is equal to 9, and I is equal to 3. Okay, so once we reach the last element, the for loop will be terminated. We will come out of the for loop. Okay, so the average, this instruction and this instruction, these two instructions, they are outside the for loop. So that is why here there is no tab space. We have not given any tab space. Now, once we come out of the for loop, we have the sum variable which contains the sum of all these elements. We have a count variable which holds the number of elements which are there in the list 1. So, okay. So now we have to compute the average. Average is equal to sum divided by count. So the result is stored in the variable called average. Then we are going to print the average. Okay. So according to the program logic, so we will print the average. So finally we will get the result, that is average of all these 5 elements is equal to 4.6. So this is a program to compute the average of all the elements given in the list without using built-in functions. Okay, so now we have to consider the built-in functions. Using built-in functions, we have to perform the same operation. So average calculation using built-in functions. So it has reduced the length of the program. Using built-in functions, we can reduce the length of the program. So once again, same logic. So declare the list1, that is a list variable, and initialize the list with all these elements. So one more variable is required, average. So to compute the average, we have used two built-in functions, sum and len. So sum, for the sum variable we have passed, sorry, for the sum function, list1 is passed as the argument. So sum function will compute the sum of all these elements divided by, so divided by is there. So len function, for this len function we have passed list1 as the argument. So len function, it returns the number of elements in the list. So average is equal to sum of list1. So here parenthesis is missing. So sum of list 1 divided by len of list 1. So this will compute the average. Average is stored in the variable called average. Now we are going to print the average. So we are getting the same answer as that of the previous program, that is average is equal to 4.6. Okay, so this is how using the built-in functions. Without using the built-in functions, we compute the average of all the elements which are given in the list. Okay, so now we will go to the next topic. Okay, now consider read the items for the list from the user and compute the average. So here, so we have to declare first empty list, and from the user we have to read the number of elements to the list, and then we have to compute the average. Okay, so first we want to read the elements for the list from the user. So that is why here we have declared the list variable, and which is empty list. We have not initialized the list 1 because for this list 1 we want to read the elements through the keyboard from the user. Okay, so it is an empty list. So empty list is declared like this, square bracket without any elements. Okay, now so we want to read how many number of elements we want to enter into this list 1. Okay, so that is why here, so we have declared one variable called n is equal to int. So yeah, before that, first consider to read the number of elements through the keyboard, we have to use the input function, that is input of. Input function, it is just like a scanf function in case of our C language. So in case of Python, input function to the function which is used to read the values through the keyboard is input of. Okay, so here inside the input of function we will write this instruction. This instruction will be printed printed on the output screen once we execute this program. See this one, input of. So inside the parenthesis we have written enter the number of items in the list 1. Okay, so we read, see here, this statement is printed on the output screen. We enter the value 4. Okay, we enter the value 4. Initially, when the user enters the integer value through the keyboard, that integer value will be a string. So here we have entered 4, but it is not an integer, it is 4. That is, it is enclosed inside the single quote or inside the double quote. So we have to convert the string 4 into the integer 4. So that is why here we have used one more built-in function called int. It is just like type conversion. So user has entered the value 4 through the keyboard. That 4 is a string. So we have to convert that string into the integer. So that is why here we have used built-in function that is a type converter. Okay, string 4 is converted into integer 4, and then it is stored in the variable called n. Now n is equal to 4. That means for this list 1 we want to insert 4 elements. Okay, so now we want to read the elements one by one through the keyboard. So that is why we are printing the statement enter the item for the list 1, items or elements for the list 1. So this print statement, it will be printed on the output screen. So here it is printing enter the items for the list 1, elements for the list 1. Okay, so now okay, so now so here in order to read the elements through the keyboard, so we use the for loop. So initially I is the first element, for the second iteration I is the second element, for the third iteration I is the third element, so like that. Okay, so I in range of n. See, this is the one more form of format for the built-in function, format for the for loop. So for this for loop we can use the range of function. So just remember, we have used range of function in our first module. So different formats are there for the for loop. So this is also one format. Using the range function, we can write the for loop. Okay, so for I in range n, that means I starts from the first location 0 to n. So we have to read the elements through the keyboard. So each element, we have taken the variable called item. Item is nothing but element. So read the element through the keyboard, and that element is, first element is 3. 3 is a string. We have to convert that string into the integer. So that is by input function is enclosed inside the